In my last Marvel video, I discussed why I think Marvel's multiverse has been considered a failure by many, and I still don't necessarily hold that opinion, but I stand by the points made that the delays from COVID and life in general had caused everything in Marvel's meticulous plan to be thrown out. Fortunately for me, and unfortunately for Marvel, there is so much more to Marvel's recent failures, and I'll always have plenty more to say about this topic, but what was originally supposed to be just a longer video essay has now blown out to be a 5-part series of videos about Marvel's failed multiverse that I'll be posting intermittently. I'd promise a weekly drop of each episode, but I have a real job, so I can't realistically do that. But subscribe if you want a quick way of knowing when I've dropped a new video. But today, I want to talk specifically about the plot devices, otherwise known as Macguffins, connecting Marvel's recent phases. Or rather, how a lack of those plot devices has left Marvel's current saga unconnected and feeling pointless. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and after a whole lot of research, I can confidently say that Marvel did have some sort of plan for the multiverse saga, because the clues are all there. We're just not going to get the final product that Feige and his think tank of Marvel experts were originally cooking up with the Multiverse saga. And I'm not saying whatever roadmap Marvel threw out would have been the second coming or anything, or that Doomsday and Secret Wars are going to be bad, just that I'm going to be very hesitant going into those two. Plenty of the blame can be tossed onto Marvel's behind-the-scenes leaders for not just sticking with their plan, but I do get it, even though it could have been possible with a recast. But I'll get back to what I think Marvel's original plan for Kang was, because first, I want to dive into what worked and what didn't work in the Infinity Saga, because it's been looked at with rose-tinted glasses lately. So many pieces of the intricate clockwork that was phases 1, 2, and 3 were actually not that intricate at all, with some elements being confused, convoluted, or entirely unnecessary. Mordo and Scorpion were set up in post-credit scenes only to be never brought up again. You can say Mordo did come back in Multiverse of Madness, but that was in the next saga, and it wasn't even him. Wanda was meant to kill our Mordo at the beginning of the movie in a deleted scene, but I'm glad that wasn't included, if only to see Chiwetel Ejiofor play an actual antagonist in a future Doctor Strange movie, mainly just because he's a phenomenal actor. And the same goes for Michael Mando's Scorpion. I'm still banking on Scorpion being a future villain for Spider-Man, really holding out hope it's in Spider-Man 4, which is still a ground-level, lower-stakes adventure, with Gargan threatening New York, or maybe even just one neighborhood and not the multiverse, despite the movie coming out in the Multiverse saga, but that topic is for another day. Because none of that changes the fact that both were left up in the air with no resolution whatsoever in the Infinity Saga, and that's without bringing up the end credits in Age of Ultron with Thanos that straight up just doesn't make any sense. But the Infinity Stones themselves were vague and only really became their comic counterparts once Thanos destroyed whatever housing unit they had in Infinity War. The coinciding colors were completely changed, the Reality Stone was turned into a sludge, and most of all, they're not called stones, they're called gems. The Tesseract, which in the comics is something completely different than an Infinity Stone, is also known as a cosmic cube, which is an object of immense power that basically just grants the wishes of whoever holds it. And that is something that Marvel can probably still use in the future, but for now, the Tesseract and the look of a cosmic cube was retconned from the comics lore to make it simpler for what Marvel had planned. And that's fine. The writers should be able to tell whatever kind of story they want, so long as it enforces a fun and emotional ride. But it's not like the Infinity Stones were intricately placed along the journey for some master design. Doctor Strange wearing the Time Stone is a well-implemented part of his movie, but aside from that, the stones were kind of just thrown in if they could be. In fact, 12 out of the 23 movies in the Infinity Saga had nothing to do with them. I'm not counting Ragnarok in that because they're mentioned early on, but it also does not feature one. Not every story needs to feature a MacGuffin. It's fun to set up the future, but at the end of the day, they're a narrative crux. I do remember having a conversation back in 2013 with a friend about the Infinity Gems and blowing his mind with the fact that these cosmic rocks would all come together and make one of the most powerful villains ever, requiring each and every character that Marvel had to take him down, and it was a blast just talking about it and speculating how it was going to happen. But that level of theorizing while also knowing exactly where the story is going can be detrimental, and takes a lot of genius maneuverings on the part of the writers and the filmmakers to simultaneously satisfy and subvert our expectations. I mean, having multiple plot devices that bring the storylines and characters together while also just being plain old plot devices is a concept that is so simple that almost every subsequent cinematic universe has at least attempted, and it genuinely works sometimes. Sometimes. I'll try not to harp on it too much just because there's an infinite number of videos, especially this one from Just Right, that talk about MacGuffins much more succinctly than I ever could. But as far as superhero movies go, pretty much every Marvel movie has revolved around a time bomb-like plot device. Shazam uses the wizard's staff as a MacGuffin twice, and both versions of Justice League use mother boxes as a powerful world-destroying object. And they are fleshed out better in the 4-hour version that takes a whole afternoon to watch, but that last one still never really worked for me. I don't even hate the narrative that there are only 3 mother boxes and are used to terraform planets for Darkseid. Kinda weird that a terraforming plotline would be used twice in a Snyder movie, but whatever. But maybe my only problem with that is that mother boxes are like iPhones in the comics. They're incredibly sophisticated and can do just about anything, but pretty much everyone has one. They're not that rare, which is what makes a MacGuffin work in a narrative. Everything surrounding it must be written well with dynamic and interesting characters, but the MacGuffin itself needs to be rare, and not just that, important to everyone, the villain most of all. It's a well-worn trope already, but ensemble movies have and will always use narrative ploys to rope its characters together by its third act. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's lazy stories relying on it that ruin the concept for others, and makes everything that involves something like that seem lazy to audiences. But really, none of that even matters, because the Multiverse Saga should be able to stand on its own without being compared to anything else, the previous phases of Marvel included. And if we look at that in a vacuum, Kang was clearly supposed to be going after Shang-Chi's rings and Miss Marvel's bangles as some kind of power source. Not that that has to be the case to bring all these characters together, but it gives general audiences a touchstone to center their focus around. And my best guess is that Kang created those two as a power source for his time machine and would be wanting them back, having lost them presumably long ago, and they've been bouncing around the universe ever since. There was also a rumor that Kang wrote the Darkhold. Maybe. I'm not too fond of that one. Mainly just because I'm a dumb nerd, and that fact would mean Cthulhu didn't write it. Not that that is of any consequence, because the real thing that matters is how the Avengers as a team aren't going to be as important in Doomsday and Secret Wars. Miss Marvel and all of the young Avengers probably would have been roped in with them trying to protect her. And despite Kang entirely, Miss Marvel hasn't been set up probably as much as she should because the Marvels wasn't received that well. But Captain Marvel and the Avengers would attempt to protect her and her bangles as well. The Avengers and Shang-Chi would save the world regardless, because that's what they do. But tying in Shang-Chi's rings would finally answer his movie's end credit scene. Presumably that could also be wrapped up in his sequel that I'm crossing my fingers is actually happening. But both of those MacGuffins would work because they are used in a similar narrative function to Thanos needing to take Doctor Strange's Time Stone or Vision's skull. It's not as dire as the second one, but having those plot devices would at least bring some closure to those storylines while also feeding into a simpler narrative for what will otherwise be a couple of confusing Avengers movies. Because for now, those plot points and MacGuffins that should be there to connect them all feel abandoned. And because of that, Shang-Chi and Miss Marvel have become infinitely less influential to Marvel's recent phases. These MacGuffins were set up with some kind of plan and roadmap to make them important, but were dropped and thus never reinforced to the audience. So people have more likely than not just forgotten about them. There's a blink and you'll miss it clue with Kang's massive ship in Quantumania powering up from what looks to be something similar to Shang-Chi's rings, but that's really it. I've stressed in many of my Marvel videos about how much I want Sam's Cap to lead the new Avengers, but aside from a cell phone call from him, realistically, how are all of these groups going to come together? How are the Eternals or the Guardians going to be written in? They could still use both MacGuffins, with Doctor Doom now going after them instead of Kang, but regardless of that, too much time has passed with nothing there to remind the audience of what's to come. The concept is set up, but needs to be hinted at every chance that the writers are given. I guess they could always use Eternity, but maybe he's already granted his one wish. I don't know. And I've talked about both of the missing MacGuffins in the Multiverse Saga, but there is yet another that has been absent to the point that Secret Wars might not even feature him, because Secret Wars in the comics has Molecule Man's infinite cosmic energy siphoned and controlled. But to my knowledge, Owen Reese hasn't been introduced at all. So even if he's brought up in Doomsday, it would feel disingenuous because the point of an interconnected saga of movies is to set up plotlines before the big event stories. America Chavez, or even Loki at the center of the multiversal world tree, could serve that exact same purpose, and that would bring them into the story in a logical way, but I'm still hoping for those other MacGuffins I've already mentioned. But if you have any thoughts on what MacGuffins Marvel should have in their multiverse saga, or if you think plot devices like that shouldn't be used in the first place, leave a comment down below with your thoughts. And hopefully join me next week as I focus on how the multiverse saga has expanded out to include more and more and more until, spoiler alert, it was too much. Inevitably, I'm gonna have a lot more than just 5 videos about even the specific topic of Marvel's multiverse, because if there's a nerdy thing I want to talk about, I'm gonna make a video about it, but just letting you know what's in store for the future. And as always, thanks for watching. It means the world to me with just a simple like, but if you want, subscribe for weekly video essays, reviews, and perhaps even a delicious sandwich.